Hey, welcome back to another episode of Mr. Neighbor versus the World, the show where I test and review everything. Now, today we will be talking about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which is part 2 in the three-part series of the retelling of the original Final Fantasy VII story. Now, a short overview of the game. It does follow the original story very closely, but it adds its own twists and turns and changes that aren't too drastic, but dramatic enough to where it feels like a different game deriving from the original. Now, I'm not going to get into the story because I'm here to talk about the actual gameplay and the game itself, but if you're an original Final Fantasy VII fan, you will enjoy and appreciate this game, I believe. And another thing, too, people are calling this game an open world game, and I would call it half open world, semi open world, because it does have a pretty big area where you can explore mostly freely, but it does have a linear progression, and in certain points of the game you can't return to different continents. You have to keep going based on where you are in the game. And also it uses the discovery system similar to Assassin's Creed and other games where you find a tower, it reveals certain points of interest, and then you go do those things, and then that's how you get the side missions done. It's not like Fallout or Skyrim where you're just wandering across and you find a cave that has nothing to do with anything else and somehow you find some random loot or something. But I want to talk about some of the negatives before we get into the positives. The first thing would be the way the camera operates and the way it moves. In fights and also in dialogues, if you stand in a certain angle or something, it would put the camera behind a wall or behind something else so you don't get the small dialogue cutscene properly, or during fights it'll put the camera again behind a wall, so it's a little hard to see or keep up with. For the most part, it's easily avoidable, or the cutscenes aren't. It's a small dialogue cutscene. It's nothing serious, so this isn't that big of an issue. It's just something that I think they could probably program slightly better to have the camera, maybe not follow as far back, or just a different angle or a fixed angle for the dialogues. Another thing is the sort of puzzle kind of obstacles and stuff. It's one of those things where it's just added length of time. Like, especially there's things called Mako vacuums where you're supposed to move just this giant heavy thing to pick up, I don't know, deposits of Mako in order to open a door, and the thing moves extremely slowly. So it's just you spend 2 minutes just dragging this thing around just to open a door when you can just press the button and open the door. That whole interaction is just kind of pointless, and I don't know. They could just cut that from the game. It does nothing for it. Another thing is what I call HD graphic movement. I have no idea what the term is or how to explain it properly. Other games do, specifically Rockstar also does this in their games, where they make the character model kind of like turn the whole way when you want to turn. And I guess it's a little more realistic, but people can turn around instantly. Like, if you in Souls-like games, if you're facing one way and you want to turn the other way, if you press backwards on the control, it'll just flip you. But in this game, it'll kind of like turn, move, and then you have to follow. It's like you're a car. You have to turn in a certain turning radius. I don't know. When you're trying to navigate the world, especially when you're trying to get to a box or a certain interact button, like an elevator or something, it makes it a little more wonky, and it feels heavy. Now, another issue for me is the synergy system. I feel like the system works pretty well, or it's interesting. But the problem is most fights throughout the game don't require they're just not long enough for you to actually practice the synergy system. So when you get to boss fights or longer fights that would actually benefit from it, I don't have any practice prior, and it didn't click for me. So I was, eventually I figured out the way it works. It makes sense, but it's just I don't feel like it was implemented well enough to where it felt natural or normal to use. And so it took me extra time to think about and figure out. And even then, I hardly ever used it because I felt like, I don't know, I didn't really need it. And also, your teammates' ATB bars fill so slowly. Like, unless you're actively switching to and using your other members, the ATB bars fill way too slowly for you to actually use the system properly. And kind of a second point, this is a separate point, but also kind of goes back to the synergy system. Throughout the game requires you to use certain party members as a lead, or you're forced to use that one person only, and specific battles or side missions or something. And two characters specifically, Aerith and Kate Sith, I could not get around. Aerith attacks so slowly and she does no damage, or maybe I just don't know how to use her, but it took me so long to get around the fights where I had to use her. And same thing with Kate Sith. He doesn't really do much on his own. He requires to summon his Moogle, and even that, it requires an ATB bar, and maybe you're taking damage by the time you finally summon it, and then they can kill the Moogle. I don't know. It becomes a whole thing. Both of them suffer from, I don't know. They're just weak. It's annoying to play them. Now another thing is NPC dialogue. Sometimes it's a lot more than needed. Specifically when you're fighting. There's this game which I'm gonna get to in a little bit for the positives, but there's a game called Queen's Blood. It's the card game that they implemented for this game. But when you finish fighting somebody or playing and beating somebody in Queen's Blood, they just keep talking forever about nothing really. Just specifically, there was this one guy who was like, "Oh, I came to this area because it's thug like, and I wasn't a thug before, but nobody would pay attention to me if I wasn't a thug, and so I picked up Queen's Blood and I kept being a thug, but then people didn't want to battle with me, but I'm glad you did, and now I don't want to be a thug anymore." It was just this whole, that was like, it was so many lines of dialogue, and he was saying nothing. It was just yapping, and so he's not the only one. A lot of dialogue with NPCs, the story dialogue, that's fine. Leave that alone. All this extra NPC dialogue, it was kind of, you can cut it. It's didn't really provide much. A lot of those characters I didn't remember because you see them once and then you never see them again. It's just like, I don't know. You don't need that much dialogue for these NPCs that you're just running into once and are not part of the story. And finally, my last issue, and this is the actual only real issue. All the other ones are just kind of minor inconveniences, but this, there are very few, but there are instances of cheese content. When something is just kind of dumb and things are scaled up for no reason and inexplicably hard for no reason, I call it cheese content. For example, one very specific example is when you're fighting Odin, because in this game, in order to get summons, you have to fight the summon in a combat simulator, and when you beat them, that's when you get the summon. One summon, Odin, he has this effect, and I don't know if I read it wrong or if I was doing something wrong. I fought him, I don't know, 20 times maybe. But if you take one instance of damage, and maybe just get good, right? Like maybe I just suck. But if you take one instance of damage, after maybe 5 seconds or so, he'll run around and then he'll just cast his ultimate and he'll just one-shot you no matter what. And the thing is, when you scan an enemy, it'll tell you how to beat them usually. And what his description says is that when you perfect block or dodge or deal damage, it'll kind of, I guess he has a built-in meter. It's not visible, but it's you're supposed to be able to get him excited or something. I don't know. It was a weird wording. But when you perfect block, it makes him attack more and it lowers the likeliness of him casting his ultimate ability and you not losing instantly. But the thing is, even after taking a single instance of damage and me perfect blocking 10 things right after that, he still just decided to cast his ultimate and I died anyway. So I tried a bunch of times. I just could not beat him for whatever reason. It felt like luck. I don't know. I guess I'm supposed to beat him without ever taking a single instance of damage, which I guess is fine, but then why would you tell me the thing about perfect blocking and dodging if that doesn't make any sense and he's going to do it anyways? But aside from all those issues or things I didn't really like, I wanted to talk about the good things. Now, the first thing would be the graphics. Unfortunately, I don't have my footage. It got lost. But if you see any sort of gameplay or trailers or anything of the game, like this game looks beautiful. The landscaping, all the models, everything at all times. It's not like those games where it looks kind of okay during the gameplay and then you have a cutscene and it looks even better. Like the cutscenes and the gameplay all are at super high definition at all times. And it's just this is an extremely good looking game. And then after that, it has its story. And if you know the original story, then you kind of know this story. But this game changes the original just enough to where it makes you wonder what's going to happen next. Because I would love a remaster of the original in these graphics and just have the same thing completely. But I do also enjoy this game and its story. This one felt like they kept the story more throughout the thing, but when there were changes, they started adding some really big twists, and it was to the point where I thought I knew what was gonna happen next, and then they just switch it up on me, and it wasn't in a bad way because they eventually got back on track and kept going with the original, but like those random twists and changes, it was just I don't know. I think they did a really good job on the changing and the retelling of the original story. Now another thing, and this is probably my favorite. There's still a few other things that I want to talk about, but probably my favorite thing about this game, aside from the story and the battle mechanics are probably my favorite things about this game. Battle mechanics, I talked about the synergy system earlier, and the synergy system could have some work, but even without the synergy, you can take out the synergy system, and the battle mechanics are still they feel so good. Specifically with Cloud though. I think he has the funnest mechanics for fighting in of any of the characters in this game. They just do it so well and it just feels so satisfying. And also I didn't say this earlier, but this game is real-time combat. It's not turn-based like the original Final Fantasy VII, and I think that adds another layer to the way you play because you need to be able to dodge and block attacks for fights instead of just taking turns. It gives you more of a sense of freedom and ability of you choosing sort of your play style. And next, another good thing that I want to talk about is the progression of the game. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth does a really good job in helping you level up and advance and be ready for the next section while not making it feel like a chore. All the side missions and all the things that you can explore and discover and do in each continent gives you XP, and if you finish all the stuff in each continent, then it will put you slightly over where you should be for the next area, and you can still go and refight like certain monsters and enemies and get more XP that way if you still wanted to over level even more, but you don't have to. If you're completing all the side missions and getting all that done and exploring the whole continent, you will be where you need to be while discovering these other side stories and exploring. It just feels like a more natural way to level up and be ready for the next section of the story. And finally, the card game Queen's Blood. It has its own storyline similar to a lot of the side missions in the continents, which I do very much recommend you do if you're going to play this game, because you're not just thrown out to do random side missions. Some of them kind of feel like that, but for the most part, you're developing another storyline aside from the main one. And so you start developing certain characters a little more, and you get to learn a couple more things than if you were just to go out, kill enemies, grind, and level up just to keep progressing the main story. You would be missing out a lot of extra content and lore if you were to skip the side rather than doing them. And Queen's Blood is another thing that actually really good, and the card game is fun. So you get to play the card game and you get to work on your deck, and you get to choose what cards go in it, and you can refine your play style more and more. But then you also are rewarded with the development of another storyline. So overall, I'd say this is a great game. They do so many things right, and the things that they do wrong, it's either very minimal or you can skip it. Like for Odin, to be honest, I skipped over Odin just because I didn't want to have to deal with that cheese. And you don't really need any summons to win the game or to win certain fights. But if you really want to, that's something that you can do. But the bad stuff are easily looked over, and everything else that the game does, they do it really, really well. So this is a really, really good game. And for the people that I would recommend it to, I would say if you're a Final Fantasy VII fan of the original or a remake, I'd say you must play this game. Like this is a must play for you. You're going to enjoy it a lot. But also if you enjoy a good hack and slash or combat style game and you want something that has really good combat mechanics, I'd say play this game too, because it has a lot of story and other stuff that you do. There's side missions and everything, but you could, if you really wanted to, you could skip all the side missions and just spend a lot of time fighting to level up. So Although I wouldn't recommend that, you can do that. And if you really like good combat mechanics, this is also a game for you. Even at full price, I could definitely recommend this game. If you could get it on sale somehow, even better. Definitely go get this. Give it a try it out. Let me know what you think. This was another Mr. Neighbor review. I'll see you guys later.